Force is with you, young Skywalker.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Tomorrow's leaders, creators, inventors, and scholars will come from the same place as today's. Discover the one thing they all have in common: the University of Southern California, inventing the future and honoring the past since 1880.
Good evening and welcome to Trojan News. Tonight we examine the various and far-reaching impacts of OPEC's recent decision not to cut oil production. As I'm sure you're all aware, last November, OPEC released the landmark decision not to cut oil production in the face of falling prices.
Oil prices have been on the downward spiral for a while now, but they sunk even further on Thursday after OPEC decided not to cut oil production. Holding a 6-hour-long meeting in Vienna, the 12 members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries decided to maintain their oil output at current levels.
In the interest of restoring market equilibrium, the conference decided to maintain the production level of 30 million barrels a day as was agreed in December 2011.
After the announcement, Brent crude oil tumbled below $73 a barrel, a low not seen since May 2010. The decision, led by Saudi Arabia, was reached despite calls from less well-off members who favored a production cut to stem the sliding crude prices.
In the past, OPEC had always cut production if prices fell below a certain threshold. This is because OPEC is the dominant world supplier of crude oil, and they therefore have the most control over the supply-demand relationship. This time, however, was different for a number of reasons, both political and economic. Our Saudi correspondent Adav is standing by with the explanation.
Thank you, Matt. As you said, OPEC has historically regulated oil prices by cutting supply when prices got too low. This means that OPEC would shoulder the burden of reducing supply and thereby reducing profit, while the rest of the world's oil-producing nations continue to produce at full capacity, while benefiting from the price stabilization that OPEC had created.
But in the past, OPEC always cut production. What was different this time?
Well, Matt, OPEC had been willing to take the hit time and time again in the past because they benefited from the price stabilization as well. I'll bet much, not as much as the other countries did. However, as any realist would tell you, benefits are relative, and if somebody else is getting more than you are, then you're actually losing. OPEC felt it was time for them to act in their best interest. They decided not to cut production so that other countries would be forced to do so instead and feel the pinch that OPEC was only too used to.
Was OPEC unanimous in its decision? Can all of its members afford this economic slump?
Well, Matt, no. OPEC was not unanimous in this decision. The Gulf states were the one refusing to cut production, while the other OPEC states, namely Iran and Venezuela, wanted OPEC to cut production as usual. The Gulf states wanted everybody to feel their pain though, including the other OPEC states, that normally don't cut production as drastically as the Gulf states do. The Gulf states have vast cash reserves that will let them go through this economic winter. But the other states, Venezuela and Iran, aren't as fortunate. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Adav. Professor of Economics at USC, John Maynard Keynes, was kind enough to come to the studio today. Thank you for being here, John.
I'm glad to be here.
Would you please explain the effects of OPEC's decision, both in the long term and the short term?
Of course. Well, first and foremost, oil prices have dropped from $100 2 years ago to $50 recently. This is really the only immediate effects of OPEC's decision, but it translates into other effects as well. Gasoline prices are down, as well as other industrial processes. However, a year from now, households will have saved a significant amount, which means that all aspects of the economy will benefit from these increased spendings that these newfound savings will have. And of course, this means an increase in GDP. This is especially true in America, since we're an automobile-based industry. But all the citizens and subjects of all countries will benefit from these falling prices to some degree. A few extra dollars for families to spend may not seem like a big deal, but when every family has a few extra dollars to spend in barrel prices, the world economy will be affected. The International Monetary Fund actually predicts that for every $10 drop in oil prices, the world economy will grow by 0.2%.
So it sounds like OPEC made a mutually beneficial decision.
There is a downside, however. Falling prices is good for the consumer, but not good for the producer. Unfortunately, oil is a big business and contributes greatly to GDP and jobs. Oil production will undoubtedly shrink, and with it, jobs creation, tax revenue, and cash flow will shrink as well. This is a long-term effect though, because oil production is slow to respond. Oil companies won't stop drilling the existing wells, but the creation of new wells will taper off to a point. America will certainly feel the effects of one of its largest industries contracting, but other countries that absolutely depend on oil production will feel it far worse.
Thank you. The outlook for countries such as Russia, Iran, and Venezuela is bleak indeed. While Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia may have the funds to ride out this economic winter, the countries I mentioned before will not. There's already much unrest and revolutionary sentiment in Venezuela, and if the government no longer has the money to provide basic services and keep order, bloodshed may be inevitable. For countries such as Russia and Iran that are pursuing unpopular domestic policies, they may have to change the way they govern their country to compensate for their lack of oil income, in addition to the sanctions that have been imposed by the West. Many other countries that are not OPEC also depend on oil, and they will be affected as well. Venezuela is one of the countries that will be most greatly affected by OPEC's recent decision. We'll go there now live to speak with Yijing.
Venezuela seeks protection from other OPEC countries as the oil price continues to fall. The highly in-debt country might have no choice but to default its debt. President Maduro has been on other countries to seek help. Its first stop is China, the biggest financial backer for Venezuela. China has been invested more than $50 billion over the past 8 years, and China has agreed to invest $20 more billion to help Venezuela go through the problem. Even with that, Venezuela still cannot stay afloat on its physical income, as it needs much higher oil price. President Maduro also goes to the Saudi to talk about how to stabilize oil price. He even claimed that the cut down of oil price is an oil war to destroy Russia and to destroy Venezuela's revolution. Financial institution Barclays predict that in the next 2 years, there might be 600% of accumulated inflation in Venezuela, with 46% of accumulated decline in wage.
Thank you. Despite not being a member of OPEC, Russia will also be greatly affected by their decision. Natalia is at the central bank now. We'll go there to speak with her.
I'm standing right in front of the Central Bank of Russian Federation. As you can see, there's a huge line right behind me. Everyone is waiting to change rubles into US dollars, which leads to further currency decline. Although Russia is not a member of OPEC, it is one of the world's biggest energy exporter. 75% of Russian GDP depends on oil. Many Russian analysts say that rapid drop of oil prices, not Western sanctions, are driving the sharp currency decline. We should all remember that manipulating prices is a powerful weapon. Historically, in the mid-1980s, the Arab, in coordination with the United States, manipulated oil prices, which caused financial economic bankruptcy of the Soviet Union. Russian president as well as other reporters around the world believe the oil price plunge is a result of deliberate and well-planned collusion on the part of the United States and Saudi Arabia to punish Russia for funding to coup Assad regime in Syria and for taking over Crimea.
Thank you. In this globalized world, every action is subject to the ripple effect. OPEC's decision will undoubtedly have significant and far-reaching impacts. The last time oil prices were subject to such drastic fluctuations was just months before the 2007 global economic meltdown. This time, hopefully, the consequences will be much less catastrophic. Only time will tell.